Almost anyone who's worked in IT has come across this situation before. A project has been left to a sole developer. And sometimes this is by choice, and sometimes this is due to accident. This obviously can create a challenging issue for management, and that is you're solely dependent on a single developer. That places huge risk. What happens when you want to either upgrade that system or move a little faster in the changes you're doing? The sole developer will become a bottleneck. Unfortunately, this situation happens more often than I'd like to see it. So I'm going to give you 3 key points on what to look out for and how to fix some of these issues when you get a sole developer dependency. I'm Matt Grace, Managing Director of Flying Donkey. Let's get into it. Firstly, sharing the knowledge. This is obviously the most obvious and hopefully the easiest way to do it, but unfortunately this always doesn't work out. The sole developer has essentially become a lone wolf on the project, and he knows the project like the back of his hand. He's never written any documentation, and he's never really worked with anyone else on the project, and therefore he's probably not a team player. But what you can do is ask them to see if they're happy to write some documentation, or if they're happy to share some of the knowledge with other people on the team. If this is the case, this is a great outcome, and this is what you should do straight away. Try and share that knowledge to try and remove this single developer bottleneck. At the same time, make sure you reaffirm with this sole developer that you're not in there to replace their job, that you're trying to do things to better the whole process. And this can be accelerating things because the business is growing bigger, or just saying to them, look, there's a risk involved here. If you happen to leave or you get ill, we have no way to move forward, and that's just too big for our business. So try and explain this to the developer so they can be on board and help this with you. If for some reason the developer doesn't want to work with you, and this does happen in more occasions than once, or the developer is simply incapable of working in a team because they've only ever worked by themselves, you're going to have to go to our second point, and that is reverse engineering the code. As discussed, if the software developer feels threatened or they're unable to work in a team, they may close up and not actually share any knowledge with the wider team. This is common, and so the only way to approach this is to unfortunately reverse engineer the code. This is a slow process, but one that is necessary in order to solve this risk in the business. The key thing to understand here is that code is written in English, and code must be understandable. So if someone's written it, someone else can understand it. And so what you get here is you get another developer, either internally or from the outside, to come in and review the code and start writing documentation to get their knowledge up. As this developer writes more documentation and learns more knowledge, this developer should share it with other people. Essentially at this point, you've made a way to bypass the sole developer and starting to gather knowledge with another source that can be shared wider with the team. When I've seen this happen in the past, it generally goes one of 2 ways. The sole developer will start seeing that there's help coming in and they're actually being useful, and they might start actually opening up themselves. If this is the case, try and encourage this and help other people to get involved and learn more of the knowledge. At the same time, the developer may close up even further. And if this is the case, just make sure that the documentation you're getting is starting to become better, and make sure you're managing that sole developer and reassuring them of where their role sits. This process can take a considerable amount of time, but it is important to get this risk resolved in your business. And finally, make sure it doesn't happen again. Obviously, after you've corrected this issue, it's key to make sure that you don't have this risk in the business in the future. And there's a few different ways you can approach this. Generally speaking, you should never have one developer only developing on a project. Even if there's only one developer amount of time available, at minimum 2 developers should always be working on a project for redundancy. If you can't afford this in your current setup, potentially employing an external software company may do this. Going out and asking them to give you 100 hours would mean that they would potentially assign 2 or 3 people to your project while also having other projects that those software developers do. And this means that more than one person is going to have knowledge of your code, and therefore this problem won't happen again. At the same time, always make sure that your developer is documenting things. Now, don't document everything because that takes too long, but at least document the key things so that if someone else is able to come in, they could easily pick it up. And finally, if your project is looking like it's going towards a single developer dependency, make sure you introduce another developer before it's too late. Essentially, as your project winds down in some instances, you may just go back to a single developer. Always keep at least 2 people on a project, even if they're sort of swapping in and out. An external software development company is always good for this because they'll generally have a wider team of people with other projects to go on with, and therefore they can have this redundancy built in for you. Here at Flying Donkey, we generally try and have at least 3 people with knowledge on a single project in order to stop any sole developer dependencies. At the same time, you should also make sure that your processes are in place so that all the code deployments are done without a single person bottleneck and that there is clear documentation in place. If you have a sole developer dependency in your business or have any questions on how to solve a sole developer dependency, feel free to reach out and ask any questions.